Today I'm going to show you how to make onion powder at home. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaka Valley Homestead. Today I'm going to show you how to make onion powder in your own kitchen at home using either older onions or cheap onions that you managed to get, or even onions you've grown yourself. For this recipe I do use my dehydrator, however you can use a kitchen oven just as easily. At our local supermarket, onions were really cheap this week, so I bought a whole lot of them and I'm going to replenish my onion powder stock. I use onion powder a lot in soups and stews, but also as a coating on fried chicken. I throw it in if I'm making my own ranch dressing. I use it for quite a few things, and it's really a good way to preserve onions, especially if you can get them cheap, or if you can actually use onions that are starting to get a wee bit soft and maybe aren't the ones that you maybe want to be eating. Obviously if they're mouldy or whatever, you don't want to do that, but it's a good way of using onions that are starting to sprout. And you can also use the tops of onions. If you've cut the greens off, you can make a green onion powder. So this method will work with all of those options. I'm just going to change the camera around so you can see what I'm doing. Right, the first thing you'll want to do is cut up your onions really finely. These ones here, I haven't even bothered peeling them because you can actually eat the peel and it tastes like it's just another layer of the skin that's hardened off. These ones I actually threw through my food processor, so I do take the root end and the pointy end off because they tend to clog up my food processor. The idea is to make them nice and fine so that they'll dry nice and quickly. The next thing you want to do is, if you're using a dehydrator tray that has holes in it, put some parchment paper or some baking paper down. If you're just using a tray in the oven, you might want to put like a cooling rack or something down to keep the onions up off the bottom of the tray. This will just help them dry quicker and more evenly. So once you've done that, and then you just need to put your onions on. Now to dry them the fastest, you'd only put them one layer thick, but to be honest that is going to take a lot of trays. So I usually put them on sort of about 1/2 inch thick. And then once they're spread out, I pop them into the dehydrator on about 60 degrees Celsius, which is about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and cook them. These ones probably take between 14 and 16 hours on that temperature, being this thickly stacked. If you put them on thinner, they won't take so long. What you can do is put them in for say 10 hours and check them. If they're still rubbery, they need to be cooked a bit longer. If you're doing it in the oven, set your oven basically as low as it can go. If it can go to 140 Fahrenheit or 60 degrees Celsius, that's great. If it's a bit warmer than that, that's okay as well. You'll just need to keep an eye on them. They will dry a bit faster in that sort of temperature. If you have a fan forced option, flick that on and let them run with that running. And you can stick a wooden spoon in the door of your oven to keep a decent air gap, which will help let the moisture out, which will let it dry even faster. Once they have been in the dehydrator for long enough, you will see these are really dry, and you can hear they just crumble. They're super crispy. If you get the odd patch that is still, like this piece here, is still quite flexible and rubbery, I will usually make one tray up with just the leftover rubbery bits. I just pick through them and find them and put them back in for another couple of hours to dry them out. If you try and powder something rubbery like this, it will clump up and your end result powder won't be so powdery. So set those chewy bits aside and redo them later. The next step is to throw it all into the food processor. If you prefer, you can use a blender or a Ninja Bullet or any of those sorts of things. Just something that will chop it up to a fine powder. You can even use a mortar and pestle if you don't have an electric appliance that will do this for you. Just be sure not to overstack it because they're quite fibrous and they can clog the machine up. So I usually do it in a couple of batches. and then you just need to pulse it until it's a powder. Now my food processor will often leave some of it a little bit chunky. Now you have two options. You can either sift out the chunky bits and put them through again, or you can keep running it until it is a fine powder, or of course you can just leave it with chunky bits. I usually tend to sift mine and then just run the chunky bits through again. This is when you'll probably find like a Ninja Bullet or a blender might do a better job than the food processor does. Once you've got your onion powder all powdered up, you can store it in an airtight jar for a really long time, as long as it doesn't get damp. If it gets damp, it'll get a bit clumpy and you do risk it going mouldy. If you have one of those wee silicone sachets that come in dried foods, you can pop one of those in there and that will help stop it getting clumpy as well. Onion powder will slowly deteriorate over time. Its potency will decrease, however it won't actually go off per se unless it gets damp and it allows the mold to grow. You can actually use this technique to make lots of different vegetable powders. You can make garlic powder, tomato powder. In fact, it's a really good way of using up tomato skins if you've been skinning tomato skins before, if you've been skinning tomatoes before you preserve them. It's a really good way of using up those tomato skins. Tomato powder adds a really tomatoey punch. A tablespoon of that in any of your soups and stews or in a bolognese or something will really boost that tomatoey flavour quite significantly, and it's a good way of using those scrap products. The same thing with, you can do it with garlic scapes as well, to make like a green garlic powder, and you can also do it with herbs and things as well if you want a powdered version rather than just a plain straight dried version of the herbs and spices that you have. I'll put my recipe down below for the coating that I used to put on fried chicken. It tastes fantastic and it does use the onion powder in it. So I'll put that in the description below for you. I hope you found this video really useful. If you have, hit the like button. Consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food. We'll see you in the next one.